Welcome to Steal Yourselves. This is the second edition of Steal Yourselves. The first one was great, and I'd like to say by popular demand, mostly it's because I wanted to do it again. We've got the second edition. What is Steal Yourselves? Well, it's where we ask a couple of eminent testers to make the best case they can for a position that they disagree with. And that's absolutely fundamental, a position that they disagree with. Anne-Marie and Lee will today be challenging themselves to convincingly talk about something that they don't necessarily think is true. And there's a learning opportunity for them and a learning opportunity for us. Lee's going to talk on the topic Shift Nowhere, a testing phase for the win. Anne-Marie is going to talk about Philip Crosby. Crosby was right, quality is free, taken from Crosby's famous book, Quality is Free. Format is 10 minutes to make the case, 10 minutes for questions. And in the questions, I'll be asking you to ask them questions literally as if they've made that case that they believe in it. And then 10 minutes for reflection. The previous Steal Yourselves is still available on our YouTube channel, and that was a really great event. If you haven't seen it, and because we were talking about it just before, I know that many of you haven't, please go back and have a look. It was really good fun. So let me just say a handful of words about the Association for Software Testing. I won't make this a big deal. There's a bunch of reasons for joining the AST. You can read them at your leisure on our website. But one thing that I do want to highlight is that we have a pay what you can afford model for membership. 3 different prices that get you all the same benefits. What we ask is that you pay what you can afford. We want to encourage diversity and inclusivity through our membership model. We also offer really great training courses. These are renowned in the industry, the black box software testing courses that we do with our partner, Altum. There are 3 levels. You'd start with foundations. That gives you a really great foundation, it's literally in the name, for your testing. And we also offer test design and bug advocacy. If you get really into it and you'd like to join us in putting the courses on, then you can take the instructor course and become a volunteer instructor with us. Okay, that's it. That's all that I wanted to say. Welcome to Steal Yourselves. First up is going to be Anne-Marie.
All righty, thank you. Let me just get my slides together. Start. Hi, everyone. Are we all looking at Quality is Free with a big QR code? James, can you give me a thumbs up? Thanks, Lee. Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. So excited to be here to talk about my most favorite topic, and that is quality and how quality is free. I know this is such good news for us all. I know. I want also to talk about really, but what I'm going to really focus on is not the slogan. You know, we got heaps and heaps of slogans in testing, like people have said, controversial ones. You know, someone famously said, test is dead, right? How many years ago was that? Like maybe 20 years, and we're still waiting for it to die. Crosby was no different in 1979 when he said quality is free. He was doing a slogan. He was trying to drive interest and conversation around quality. And so he made his book, Quality is Free. In fact, I'm going to show you the real quote. Quality is free. It's not a gift, but it is free. He says, what costs money are the unquality things, all the actions that involve not doing jobs right the first time. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds very, very similar to Deming's, prevention. So it's all about preventing errors rather than actually sort of testing at the end. This is something that we have hold true in modern testing, right? It's all about, people talk about shift testing left, building quality in, right? This is exactly the same philosophy that Crosby was saying in 1979 when he wrote this book. So, I think we need to explore this a bit more and try and understand what exactly he was talking about, and really help us understand how we can actually apply his tenets to today to our modern testing. Now, he had 4 tenets, right? So I'm going to share those 4 tenets. He called them the 4 absolutes of quality. So I am going to share those with you today. I'm going to go through them one by one, and I'm going to show you why these things stand true today. All right, here we go. The first one, probably his most famous, and maybe even today, you're going to feel like, hey, this is controversial. But bear with me. I'm going to explain to you why this is true. The definition of quality is conformance to requirements, not as goodness. Now, I think when we first see this, we, especially many of us who have done exploratory testing and who are big proponents of exploratory testing, will go, this is so not true. No matter how good your requirements are, you are never going to be able to get complete conformant, because requirements are just a model, right? And all models are flawed, right? And so even your requirements, you're never going to get a complete set of requirements. It's why we need to do things like exploratory testing. But, I think we need to take a step back from this and just think about it for a second. Imagine if at your work, what happened if the requirements at work were treated with the utmost reverence, like he's suggesting? How amazing would that be, right? That people actually took requirements and were completely committed to making sure that those requirements were completed properly. And that's what he's talking about here. Crosby really understood, he worked, if you look into his life, Crosby actually worked as a tester from the ground all the way up into management. He understood quality really, really well. He understood the subjective nature of quality. But the thing about Crosby, he also understood what it took to get your manager on board. And this is why he focused on conformance to requirements, because this is something that managers could actually hook into and become involved in. So, he talks about in his books how in order to meet our customers' requirements, we have to identify desires, needs, and wants to the degree possible. So he actually is putting the pressure on getting those requirements completely well understood and making sure that those requirements reflect what the business actually really need and want. And I think this is something we could all do with a bit of rigor around this area today. I think we've kind of shifted way to the other side where we're more than happy to put something out and test it in the market. Whereas, which is great, that's a great model too, but we've got to balance it with rigor at the start. And I know you're all with me on this one, because we've all been there when it's painful, incomplete requirements. The other reason why this is really important is because it actually pushes the onus onto the management to make sure the requirements are right, not the team. So this was one of the first reasons why I think this is so valid for today. We need to get this rigor back. All right. So, the other thing that's worth also saying is that, if we want to improve quality, I think this is one of the things yes, quality is subjective, but if we want to really improve it, we need to be able to measure it to some extent. How can we know something is improved if we can't see any improvement? Well, what are we measuring in order to see that improvement? And so by stating that quality is conformance to requirement, it gives us a base by which we can start measuring quality improvement. So yes, quality is subjective, but it's also conformance to requirements. It's not either or. All right, moving on. Second tenet, the system of quality is prevention, not appraisal. Now, when he's talking about appraisal here, he's basically saying testing. And this is so true, especially, I think even more so today, that testing is really, really expensive. and it prevents us from getting our products to market rapidly. If we do exhaustive testing, you know, it's really hard to get our systems and our features out there rapidly. So this is not something like amazingly mind-blowing, right? This is something that we held true. As I said, Deming talks about building quality, and these are good things. So prevention rather than trying to find and fix those problems in production when it's way, way, way more expensive, right? Look, in our personal lives, we do this, right? We practice prevention all the time. We go to doctors, you know, before we actually get really sick. But for some reason, like, we don't do this at work, right? We wait until the errors become, it seems to be okay to do that. Well, what Crosby was doing, he was putting a line in the sand and saying, no, it's not good enough. We need to try and prevent these problems from occurring in the first place. The performance, so the next tenets he talks about, the performance standard is zero defect. Okay, this is another super, super controversial one. And I know, just calm down, everybody, just calm down. Like, you know, zero defects, it's not possible. I know. But it's really, really interesting when you start reading the why he put this. This was another one of those controversial statements that he put out there to get our attention. And boy, did he get our attention, right? But what he was saying here is, like, we need the management needs to be accountable for zero defects. Our aspiration should be zero defects. It's not good to say that it's going to be good enough, or, you know, oh, we'll pick it up in production, or it's going to be okay. Because what you're actually doing there is you're setting a culture where basically it's okay to have problems in production. Now, we know that there's always going to be problems in production. Crosby knew that there was always going to be problems in production. But what he was saying, he was again drawing that line in the sand and saying it's not good enough to accept that fact. We have to be aiming for zero defects. So avoiding a culture where shaving the edges of work to be done becomes acceptable. This is what he was trying to achieve. And this is why he brought out this statement. And a 14-step program for improvement as well, but I don't have time to go through that with you, so you'll just have to take my word for it. I can share it with you later if you like. And the final tenet that he talks about is the measurement of quality is the price of non-conformance, not indexes. Right, now we're on to metrics. Oh my God, if your blood pressure is at 80%, it's probably jumped up to 95. Again, just take a deep breath. We're going to talk metrics, yes. But what Crosby was trying to do here was, as I said before at the start, he really had a fantastic grasp of what mattered to managers. And he realized that if you start talking about metrics and sort of defect rates, or, you know, trends in this or that, eyes start to glaze over, you know, people start to kind of not look at things. And, like, you know, this is not stuff that is, you know, this happens today as well. Like, how many of you have problems trying to get your senior managers to look at metrics? It's really, really, really hard, right? So he had the same problem, and he was going, you know what, if we start talking about cost, suddenly everyone's going to be interested, right? One of the things he sort of, he talks about is, like, how when managers get together, what they love to talk about is 4 things: money, more money, lack of money, and how to get more money. I don't know, something like that. But anyway, it's all around money. So when we're talking, we need to talk in the language, and in the language of our managers, because he was, Crosby was passionate about getting management buy-in. Quality cannot be improved if we just leave it to the people who are working in the teams to achieve quality. It's essential that we have management buying into quality and owning that taking that accountability and owning it. And by talking about money, this was how he achieved that. So the goal was, again, was to get the buy-in, to get the commitment in order to be able to achieve, in order for the teams to be able to achieve the quality that they wanted. That was all he was trying to do here. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up a bit about, like, just to summarize all of this. You know, my reading from him and my understanding of Crosby is really someone who understood quality in a deep way. He'd been on the trenches. He knew what it was like trying to be a quality professional, injecting quality into a system. And so he took a step back and he looked at it, and he looked at the management structure and the corporation structure. And he said, in order to drive change, I need to be able to influence, managers need to take a step in. And I also, you know, and we also need to be talking in the language that our managers understand. He was a great marketer. And look, there's many people out there who are like that too, right? Testing is dead, lots of all this stuff. And it was there to catch people's attention, attention. Is it strictly true? Ooh, maybe not, but there's lots of things out. Is testing dead? Probably not either. He was passionate about building it right for the first time and people owning their mistakes. And he spoke in a way that management understood and valued and allowed management to own quality. Now, I realize there are many diehards out there who don't believe in Crosby, but I'm telling you, some of this stuff is gold and really can be applied into modern contemporary engineering organizations. Is it the only model that we need? Absolutely not. We have many models out there. This is a very corporate management focused model. I think it's a great model when you're talking to managers and trying to drive change in a systematic corporate way. Do we need other models that probably are more nuanced in terms of conformance of requirements and allow exploratory testing and things like that? Of course, we need those too, but it doesn't negate what Crosby said. It doesn't mean that Crosby was incorrect in some of the statements that he made. And that's why I was more than happy to defend Crosby today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for that very spirited defense of Crosby. Okay, we've got around 10 minutes of questions. Remember, you're questioning Anne-Marie in her role as defender of Crosby. She'll talk at the end of this about her reflections on the experience of doing that. Please raise your hand if you've got a question, or type it in the chat and I can ask it for you. While we're waiting for a few questions to come in, Anne-Marie, let me ask you one. What does Crosby have to say about all the work that goes into understanding what the requirements are and kind of thinking about that and testing the assumptions that go into generating the requirements?
Look, he doesn't go, he might have gone, not what I've read. I did buy the book to read the book. I hadn't read a lot about Crosby until then. Of course, I knew his catchphrases. He doesn't go into a lot about how to do that. He talks about really understanding the customer well, and that he indicates that that's a responsibility for what he calls business. And he says, understanding their desires, understanding their needs. Do you really understand what they want? And I think, if you look at product owners and product managers today and their focus on discovery and understanding, I think Crosby would be really, really happy. I mean, Crosby died in 2001, and so he doesn't get to see this, but I think he would have been happy to see that discovery and effort being made into really understanding the customer and understanding their needs.
Okay, thank you. Gerard, you got your hand up if you'd like to share, ask your question.
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Anne-Marie, for defending Crosby. I'm going to take issue, I think, a little bit with one of the tenets there, and it's that of, and this is the one that was raising the blood pressure for everybody, having zero defects as a personal goal and avoiding that's close enough and avoiding shaving at the edges. And where I'm coming from is the agile notions of it's about maximizing the amount of work not done and things being just barely good enough. And putting those both together, my question would be around, what if the requirements are bad? Is it's still acceptable to say there should be 0 defects as a personal goal, and that's close enough, and to shave at the edges. Because if you get bad requirements in Agile, you can still release, you can accept that tech debt, you can push it to the side. But in Crosby's model, is he not about saying things have to be perfect? How do you then, I guess, justify that? And would there not be a cost?
I think there's going back. I think we need to parse a few things. There's a lot of things that you put up there, Jared. So thanks for the question. I'm going to probably have to clarify a few things with you. But I think what we're talking about, what is a defect here, right? Is it actually a defect as in the requirements are incorrect, or is it a defect as in it doesn't meet the requirements? So I think there's two different things here that we would need to explore in that. My experience is that, with the concept of recoverability over perfection, I think that, and by recoverability over perfection, what I'm talking about there is that, that it's rather than getting perfect software out the door, we should, accept that we're going to have a certain amount of defects or issues and incidents, and that we basically balance in lieu of speed, right? We balance that by saying, okay, we'll be okay with a certain amount of defects. I think this is actually a dangerous philosophy to take, because it makes it hard to know when exactly have we crossed the line here. I think you see in some organizations, they actually have pushed against that philosophy and said, we will, even if a defect gets raised, we're going to fix it there and then. It's like find and fix. We don't have a defect backlog. We don't have anything like that. We're just actually we're not going to have this big triage and discussion about whether the bug should be, is it a bug or is it not? We're just going to fix it. Like just not, and just not have this 0 defect tolerance. I mean, so it's not like this is a new concept in Agile today either. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I tried to kind of touch on 2 of those broad topics.
Thank you.
Question from the chat, Anne-Marie, from David. Does Crosby give any guidance on managing the relationship between the team and management? I feel quite anxious about what the team OKRs might look like. I don't know if OKRs were around when Crosby was writing. I think that much of the responsibility for error-free operations would be delegated by the accountable management team.
I think like his philosophy, as I said, okay, I don't think OKRs existed then, but I think like he was very passionate about like the concept of management shutting the door on managing and getting up, rolling their sleeves up and being part of, accountable to the work, right? And understanding, really understanding like the issues and being on the line for those issues rather than delegating it to someone else. So he was a fierce advocate for not delegating, I guess. And so the buck stopped with the management, like they were on the line for that. So I think, this sort of concept there of sort of delegating to the team wouldn't, in his book, shouldn't exist, right? At the end of the day, that accountability holds with management, not with the teams. So it's up to management to give the space and allocate the time in order to do things right the first time. And I think this is something personally I really identify and see with in modern engineering today, right? Where we have like this kind of get stuff out the door as fast as possible, and people, even if they don't feel like they have time in order to do things properly. And it's like, well, what's going on there, right? That's really interesting. And I think it's up to the management to step in and say, hey, we do have time. We are going to do this properly the first time. We don't need to push it rapidly out the door. And to be that sort of person, I guess the gatekeeper to some extent, right? To say, no, this matters. Let's do it right the first time. And that's what he was pushing.
Okay, and that ties in, I think this will be the last question from Bozidar, I hope I pronounced your name right. What exactly stands behind building it right the first time? What approaches can we use to ensure that we do?
I can talk about what I would use. I think building it right the first time, I think, is a proper discovery and understanding. But the key thing in my book is collaboration and communication. Do we actually have those discussions about what do those requirements mean? What are those stories? You know, do we understand the business domain behind the stories? Do we really understand the purpose of what we're building? And, you know, having discussions about what does that mean in terms of testing, right? And proper estimates about testing. And, you know, I think like if we are able to get into those discovery sessions and ask those questions about, you know, well, you know, for example, how does the system interact? You know, a classic one is how does it interact with other parts of the system? And these are questions I think testers are really, really good at asking, right? They spot the gaps, and we know, like, I think something smells a bit wrong here. I'm going to ask a question on this, right? And then suddenly you just blow up everything, right? And everyone has to start again from scratch. But that's what we do, right? We ask those difficult questions, and if we ask those difficult questions early on, we're going to prevent a whole heap of rework being done. So I think those sorts of things at a simple level is we want to increase the collaboration. We want to make sure that, you know, we have people asking those critical questions early on, and maybe they don't necessarily have to be the testers, but testers are really good at doing that.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to a future Steal Yourselves where somebody argues for very detailed testing estimates. Let me give you a few minutes now to reflect, Anne-Marie. Tell us how you found this experience, and if anything changed in the way that you view Crosby, or the topics that Crosby talks about, or anything else.
Yeah, no, thanks, James. Look, I think some of the things that, well, I'll have to be honest, like I've known a lot about Crosby's slogans, but it was only until I actually started reading some of his stuff in depth that I figured out that a lot of what he's talking about makes good sense. I mean, I think, like, I wouldn't take it all. Like, I don't think every model is flawed. So, and I think some things don't stand the test of time. I think, you know, conformance to requirements, I have a problem with that. I think we do need rigor in our requirements, but I think we need to have that nuanced approach where we understand that our requirements are incredibly difficult to get right 100% the first time. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? So I think there's something there that we can learn from, but I think I would take that with a pinch of salt. I think it would be really hard for me to go into a team and propose for 0 defects. I understand his philosophy and his kind of, you know, you have to believe it. Like he says, you have to believe you're going to have 0 defects in order to create a culture where, you know, good quality exists built in the first time. And I think those are sorts of things I would struggle to put my hand on heart and stand up and say. But I think there's something behind that says, well, how can we actually get that thinking into our organizations, right? Where people are absolutely passionate about doing things well the first time, right? And I think there's something to be said there for how we deliver and just slowing down in order to speed up, you know, and really doing things properly the first time and saving ourselves a lot of rework and unplanned work that ends up happening in production. So I think there's something really true about that, which I hadn't really known that he was an advocate. And listening to some of his stuff, I do realize, like, yeah, heavy marketing, you know, like, so that was really interesting to kind of parse between the sort of the hype and the value add. So yeah, so I think I learned a lot from doing this. So I really appreciate the opportunity to explore the stuff. But I'm not sure I'd take everything into my current workplace, but I certainly take some of it.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm glad you found some value in it. I know that I've certainly enjoyed listening to you talk about it.
Thank you.
Lee, you're up next. Let's see how you got on with your topic.
Okay. See if I can cross the first hurdle. That would be sharing my screen. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up that we can see my slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm talking with you today from the Bellarine Peninsula, which is about 100 kilometres outside of Melbourne in Australia. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where I happen to have the good fortune to present today. That is the Wathaurong people of the Wathaurong Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm here to talk about shifting nowhere and why a testing phase is for the win. So, very quick intro to me. That's what I look like. This is how you can stalk me on the internet. I've been in the testing game for about 20 years. I've got a couple of books on testing, so I know what I'm talking about. So please listen to my arguments to come about why testing phase is the way to go. So let's get into it. Firstly, what do I mean by testing phase? If I think it's the thing you should do, what is it? Please don't get confused by looking around the internet for a definition of what a testing phase is, because I've done the work for you. And in fact, the ISTQB provides the definitive definition of what a testing phase is, and they say that it is a distinct set of test activities collected into a manageable phase of a project. For example, the execution activities of a test level. So there we go. That's testing phase. It's a distinct chunk of testing effort. And in the way I'm going to talk about it today, that's typically scheduled after a development phase has been completed and preferably signed off. So we know all the development work is done and we can get on with the important task of testing it. Now, this deliberate sort of testing phase idea is found in all software development life cycles. It might be called something else, depending on that particular life cycle, but it's always there. So in waterfall and agile teams, there's always some idea of this testing phase. So really, why would you fight the industry standard? Well, if you want to do something else and say that testing phase is a waste of time, why would you do that? Like, a testing phase has literally always been a feature of software development life cycles. We do have phases for requirements gathering and specifications. We have phases for design work. We have phases for development work. So why would testing be any different? So there must be a testing phase, right? It's just an established best practice in our industry. Most software development teams still make use of a testing phase. Just look around, most teams are still doing this. There's a reason they still do it, and that's because it's a good idea, right? It's a proven idea to help us build quality software. But this proven idea is under attack from two sides at the moment. The shift left movement and the shift right movement. Everyone's shifting around. So let's have a look at those two attacks on this proven idea of a testing phase. So shifting left. So that it really doesn't make sense for you to start testing until all the requirements have been coded. Right? It almost sounds ridiculous to have to say this, but if you're trying to test something that's not finished, then obviously you're going to need to retest it when it changes. So this creates a lot of work. Right? If the thing has changed since you tested it, you've got to keep track of the things that haven't changed and what you tested before to work out what you need to retest. So there's a lot of inefficiency in doing that. There's a lot of waste that's introduced by testing a bit too early. And the shift left movement, which proposes this is a great idea, seems to ignore a lot of the downsides of testing too early. So the good old testing phase helps you to prevent testing too early, because we don't start testing until the requirements have been coded. And so it actually improves your efficiency. This is important. Managers like efficiency. As Anne-Marie just said, you know, Crosby was sort of talking about shift left back in 1979. But again, there's lots of risks that actually trying to test things too early introduces. And on the flip side, we've got the attack from the shift right brigade. So we now run the risk of testing too late. So you know, if we don't have a scheduled testing phase that only starts once all development is complete, then you know any sort of late changes to the software are a big problem. And the shift right movement will tell you that testing in production is a good idea, but there's lots of risks involved in doing that. There's a reason we haven't been doing that for the last 20 or 30 years of software development. That's because there's a lot of risk in doing that. So the dedicated testing phase, again, is there to help stop you testing too late, because the testing phase guarantees that you actually schedule the testing at the perfect time. That is after the development's been finished, but before it goes out to your users in production. And what about gatekeeping? Well, you know, testers really need to be the independent arbiters of quality. Who else is going to do it? Right, that's the role of testing. And a testing phase sort of supports that distance between, for example, developers and other team members and the test effort. And if we have that dedicated testing phase, then that allows us to actually control the quality by having that gatekeeping responsibility of the testers within the testing phase. And by having the gatekeeping, then we can ensure quality, because again, we don't test until things are finished, but we do test before the software gets out to our customers. So we can actually have a meaningful sign-off of the software under test, because we've tested something that's not still changing, and we've tested it before it's inflicted on any customers. So just to summarize, testing phase is for the win. 4 points. It's an industry standard. We all know it. We've just got to stop denying it. It's an industry standard. It's a best practice. It stops us preventing too early while stuff's still changing. Stops us preventing too late when customers have already got problems. And it allows testers to fulfill their ultimate promise, which is gatekeeping quality. That's my argument. So over to James to field any questions or counter arguments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I am scared by how strongly you seem to feel this case. So questions as before, please. Put your hand up and I'll invite you to ask your question, or if you want to put it in chat, I'll ask it on your behalf. Let me ask one first, though. You talked a lot about proven best practice. Where's your evidence?
Well, I think history is the evidence, right? There's a history of successful software projects that have used a testing phase.
Also unsuccessful software.
Oh, sure, but way more successful software. I think I missed my my main sort of source of truth about this. I don't know where that went on my slide deck, but I actually asked ChatGPT why we needed a testing phase. And ChatGPT, like, literally has got access to the entire wisdom of the internet. Like, it's not just me saying this. This is like the entire world that's ever been is saying, and it said something like, a testing phase is an essential part of the software development lifecycle. So I'm just going to rest my case, I think.
Okay, anyone got questions? Does everybody just agree with what Lee's put forward? Yeah, who's got something that they'd like to challenge him on? I can ask you another, Lee, while people maybe come up with questions. A little bit more seriously this time. One of the appeals that you made in your case was that testing too early, if you find a problem, or if the work isn't finished, you kind of end up retesting and retesting and retesting. And I guess testing in a phase at the end, if you find something's wrong, you've got a very big loop to go back to. You've still got retest, but it's now a big loop with the finish system that's changed and all the interactions that go with the finish system. You appeal to efficiency as well. Do you think that's efficient to wait till the end and have everything potentially changed rather than test earlier and have a small thing at a time changed?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's no question it's more efficient to do it at the end.
Can you say why?
Well, you know, if all of the development work has been completed, right, and then you go into the testing phase and you find a problem, then at least we can just fix that problem and retest based on that problem, right? We don't have to. We're not changing heaps and heaps of stuff continuously, which is the problem with some of the shift left ideas. I think is that people are really trying to start very, very early in the development phase where things are really still changing far too much for any testing to be meaningful. So I think wait until the end. Like, it sounds as though it's going to be less efficient if you add up all that sort of smaller retesting that would have been required if you'd started too early. It's still more efficient to do it in one block at the end.
Okay, I would like to talk to you more about that, but we have a question from Vicky, maybe, or Vici. Do you think these arguments are related to specific frameworks, e.g. loads of development environments, or areas in the industries, e.g. very regulated areas? So I guess that probably that's a question around context. Does this apply everywhere?
I think it does apply everywhere. As I said at the start, I haven't seen any software development life cycles that don't essentially have a testing phase in them. They might call it different things, it might be in different places, but they all have it. So maybe there's a context where it doesn't make sense, but you know, I can only speak to my experience that I haven't seen one.
Anybody have an idea of place where they think this big heavyweight phase wouldn't apply?
Why didn't I do a better job?
So, sorry, go ahead. Someone was going to talk. Anne-Marie, before code's written. Can you speak to that, Lee?
Before code is written. You want a testing phase before the code is written. Well, again, you know, maybe that comes back to that Crosby stuff too. That you know, you can have a useful testing, you know, critical thinking exercise before code is written to make sure that your requirements are really good. You know, if we get perfect requirements, then you know that makes the testing phase even more sort of valuable at the end and efficient, right? Because we're not expecting to find as many problems at the end.
Okay, question from David. How would you see the testing of non-code deliverables, for example, requirements? I guess that's related to what you've just said.
Yeah, I think so. Like, again, you know, there has to be a testing phase for requirements as well. Otherwise, we start building something before we know what we're building. So I think the idea of a testing phase that gatekeeps requirements is perfectly valid as well.
But why not just wait till the very end and test the requirements and the code together? Wouldn't that be more efficient?
I think it would be more efficient because you might have built the wrong thing, and then you know you're trying to find problems in the wrong thing than trying to find problems in the right thing. But I take your point.
David says, so there's a testing phase aligned to every phase of the SDLC. So we're shift nowhere, but testing everywhere.
You could argue that, I guess. But the testing phase I was particularly referring to here was the one that traditionally follows completion of development. That's the most common spot for it. But That doesn't mean it's the only spot where it makes sense.
Okay, thanks. Let's just finish with this one then. This one's to both of you. How to handle technical debt created consciously in order to deliver on speed, so to a fixed deadline, which goes against getting it right from the start, and it's also hard in on the testing phase. So maybe Lee first.
Deliberate technical debt. Well, yeah, I don't think whether you have a testing phase or not, that makes a lot of difference to that. If you're going to have deliberate technical debt, then that has impacts all the way through the software development lifecycle. Right? And the testing phase might identify problems that are caused by living with that technical debt. But if you had some other testing model, you'd still be in the same situation. So I don't think there's anything necessarily better or worse in that sense by having a testing phase or not.
Anne-Marie, did you have a perspective on that? Would that be regarded as a requirement?
No, I mean, I think people fall into this concept that MVP is like, doesn't require good quality practices, and that is just not true. Like, it's minimum viable product, not minimum viable code. So I think you need to sort of stop and think about, we're still delivering a product, and what does that mean? And you're handling tech debt to create it consciously. It's like, why would you do that? You say it's to deliver speed, but then this is just a fallacy, right? Because what happens is all your engineers are spent firefighting, fixing problems in production, and they're not able to, do the next feature at speed at all, because they're doing all this unplanned work. So I think there's this kind of concept, and I think it's just lazy thinking, to be honest. And, I think you have to get it right the first time. And that means it involves testing, and it means that it's about, minimizing tech debt.
Okay, thank you. Lee, you can step out of character now. Would give you a few minutes to reflect on how that experience was for you.
Yeah, cool. No, it was a lot of fun, actually. Hopefully it was a little bit of fun to listen to. I did a practice run with one of my good friends here. I'm not sure if he's on the call or not recently, and he was disturbed by how convincing my argument was, and wondered if all the stuff I'd been talking about for years was actually true. But anyway, I did learn a lot, and one of the things I learned is that there's not much in the way of consistency about what people actually think of as a testing phase. If you do search around on the internet, people talk about testing phases in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, confusing testing phases with even sort of types of testing, like performance testing phases and functional testing phases and things. So it's all got a bit muddled up. And I'm not sure whether I'm attributing this sort of phrasing correctly, but I know Michael Bolton has used it, and he says, instead of like the shift left, shift right thing, talking about spreading left and spreading right might be more useful. Because I think that the danger is that people think of the stuff they used to do in that testing phase, as I've described it, they go shift left and they try to do that same stuff earlier, or vice versa. They try to do that same stuff later, and it's not about doing the same stuff earlier or later. It's about doing different stuff. So we do get to that point that we just sort of got banged against there, which is sort of we actually testing all the way through. We're doing different types of testing activities that are appropriate to the point in the development life cycle. So I think that sort of spreading this stuff across makes more sense than talking about shifting it, because the danger, as I see, is that people have shifted to the left, so they're testing like very small slices of functionality in stories or something. So those very thin pieces of their applications, and they're shifting right in production after it's actually gone all the way through to customers. But where's that bit that we used to do to see if everything still fits together and we have a usable product in the middle. So so I'm not against a testing phase somewhere, not in the sense that we used to have these big, stop everything, test for months sort of phases, but at least having some humans sort of taking pause for a while, having a look at what we've built before it gets into the hands of customers. So I quite like the idea of still doing that in some fashion, whether we call it a testing phase or a pause or whatever, but maybe it is a potential cure for some of this need for speed that Anne-Marie talked about.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to Lee and Anne-Marie. We're going to wrap this up now. One of the things that has been interesting to me today is that both of the speakers have kind of said, if you strip the dogma out of these kind of slogans, there's actually something valuable to be learned. And I think that's something that we can probably all keep in mind as we go about our day-to-day work.